When NBA superstar LeBron James returns to the forgotten village of Pine Hills, no one suspects his true intentions. 25 years ago, he lived here with his mother during their hardest times, hungry, poor, and struggling to survive. Now, worth millions, LeBron arrives without fanfare or cameras, driving a modest rental car down the cracked streets of his former hometown. As he reconnects with people from his past, including Ms. Wilma, who once slipped him peppermint candies, and Coach Miller, who gave him his first real basketball, LeBron observes how little has changed. The school still crumbles, children still go hungry, and opportunity seems as distant as ever. But LeBron carries a vision bigger than anyone imagines, one that will not only transform Pine Hills, but potentially change how America addresses forgotten communities nationwide. What begins as a quiet homecoming will become a revolution of hope, proving that sometimes the most meaningful gifts come full circle. The rental car kicked up dust as it rolled down the cracked asphalt road leading into Pine Hills. LeBron James gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening slightly as the familiar landmarks came into view. 25 years had passed, but the water tower with its faded blue paint still stood sentinel over the cluster of weathered buildings that made up the town center. He could have arrived in a private jet, landed at the nearest airport, and been driven here in a luxury SUV with tinted windows. That's what his security team had suggested. But that wasn't the point of this trip. He'd chosen a plain mid-sized sedan instead. No entourage, no cameras, no fanfare. Just like old times, he murmured to himself, though nothing about his life now resembled the desperate months he and his mother had spent in this village. The car slowed as he approached Main Street, a generous name for the short stretch of road, lined with a gas station, a dollar store, and a diner whose neon "open" sign flickered weakly in the afternoon sun. A few people walked along the cracked sidewalks, their pace unhurried. Life moved slowly in Pine Hills. It always had. LeBron parked near the convenience store that still had Miller's Market painted on its windows, though he knew the Miller family had sold it years ago. Above the store were 3 small apartments. In one of those, he and his mother had lived for 8 months when he was 9 years old. Those months had been among their hardest, but they'd also shaped him in ways he was only now beginning to fully understand. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of the car. At 6'9", he stood out anywhere, but here in this tiny village, he might as well have been a giant. A couple walking nearby stopped mid-stride, the man's mouth falling open in silent recognition. "That's..." the woman started to say, but her words trailed off as if she couldn't quite believe her eyes. LeBron nodded politely and kept walking, heading toward the convenience store. The bell above the door jangled as he entered, the sound exactly as he remembered it. The layout had changed, but the smell was the same, a mix of coffee, cleaning products, and the slightly stale air of a place that didn't get proper ventilation. Behind the counter, a young man scrolled through his phone, barely looking up at the sound of the bell. When he finally glanced toward the door, his phone clattered to the counter. "Holy sh... are you really?" the clerk stammered. "Just passing through," LeBron said with a smile that conveyed both friendliness and a gentle request for normalcy. He walked through the aisles, memories flooding back with each step. The back corner where the cheapest bread was stocked. The refrigerator where his mother would carefully select the single item they could afford as a treat that week, usually a small carton of chocolate milk they would share. He picked up a chocolate milk now, more out of nostalgia than thirst, and paid for it, leaving a $100 bill in the tip jar while the starstruck clerk wasn't looking. Outside again, he sipped the milk and walked toward the small park at the center of town. The playground equipment looked older than he remembered. The same swings and slide, just more rust, more wear. A few children played there under the watchful eyes of parents who sat on benches, scrolling through phones or talking in low voices. One elderly woman sat alone, her cane resting against the bench beside her. Something about her seemed familiar. The way she sat with her back straight despite her years, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. As LeBron approached, her eyes widened with recognition. But unlike others who had spotted him, her expression wasn't one of celebrity awe. It was something deeper. "Little Bron?" she said, her voice wavering slightly. "Gloria's boy?" The childhood nickname stopped him in his tracks. Nobody had called him that in decades. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, moving closer to her bench. "I'm sorry, I don't." "Ms. Wilma," she said, pressing a weathered hand to her chest. "I lived next door to you and your mama in the apartments. You used to help me carry my groceries up those awful stairs." The memory clicked into place. Ms. Wilma with her peppermint, candies that she'd slip into his pocket when his mother wasn't looking. Ms. Wilma, who had once given him a pair of sneakers that her grandson had outgrown. "Ms. Wilma," he repeated, his voice thick with unexpected emotion. "May I sit with you a moment?" She patted the bench beside her, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. "I always knew you'd do great things, child. Always knew it." "You remember me from back then?" LeBron asked, genuinely surprised that anyone from this brief chapter of his life would recall him so clearly. "How could I forget? You were so tall even then, all knees and elbows, but so kind, always asking if I needed help." She paused, studying his face. "Your mama raised you right. How is Gloria?" "She's good, strong as ever," LeBron replied, smiling at the thought of his mother who had sacrificed everything to raise him. "And now look at you," Ms. Wilma continued, gesturing vaguely at his entirety. "A big basketball star, seeing your games on TV, doing all those good things for children, makes an old woman proud, even though you're not mine to be proud of." They talked for a while longer, LeBron asking about changes in the town, Ms. Wilma filling him in on the small dramas and developments of Pine Hills. As they spoke, more people began to notice his presence. Children pointed. Adults whispered. A small crowd began to gather at a respectful distance. "They're wondering why you're here," Ms. Wilma said, nodding toward the onlookers. "Big star like you coming back to a place like this? Must be a reason." LeBron nodded, his expression turning serious. "There is." "Going to tell an old woman what it is?" He looked around the town square, at the boarded-up buildings, the children playing with makeshift toys, the tired faces of adults who had worked too hard for too little for too long. "Not yet," he said finally. "But soon, everyone will know." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, LeBron stood and helped Ms. Wilma to her feet. The crowd had grown, their curious stares following his every move. He knew the questions they must be asking themselves. Why was LeBron James in Pine Hills? What could possibly bring someone who had everything back to a place that had next to nothing? They would have their answers soon enough. But first, there was someone else he needed to see. Someone who had changed the course of his life with a single act of kindness and belief. As he helped Ms. Wilma toward her home, he asked the question that had been on his mind since he decided to return. "Ms. Wilma, do you know if Coach Miller still lives here?" Her smile told him everything he needed to know. "Coach lives out on Maple Road now," Ms. Wilma said, pointing toward the east end of town. "Same little house for 30 years. Man never could be convinced to move, even after his wife passed." LeBron nodded, memories of Coach Miller flooding back. As he helped Ms. Wilma to her door, they made plans to meet again before he left town. Walking back to his rental car, the weight of the past pressed down on his shoulders. The familiar, Streets unlocked memories he'd kept carefully compartmentalized for years. Sliding behind the wheel, he didn't start the engine immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes, allowing himself to remember that difficult time. The 8 months that had shaped him in ways no championship ever could. 9-year-old LeBron, huddled in the passenger seat of his mother's battered Chevy, watching raindrops race down the window. They had been driving for hours, leaving Akron behind after the latest eviction notice. His mother's hands were tight on the steering wheel, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Just for a little while, Bron," Gloria James had said when they crossed into the tiny village of Pine Hills. "My friend Tanya says there's work here and a place we can stay until we get back on our feet." But Tanya hadn't been there when they arrived. Her trailer was empty, a "For Rent" sign hanging crooked in the window. With nowhere else to go and only $43 to their name, Gloria had parked near the town's small convenience store and tried not to cry as she contemplated their options. Mr. Miller, the store owner, had found them there in the morning. Gloria asleep in the driver's seat, LeBron curled up beneath his jacket in the back. "You folks okay?" he'd asked, tapping gently on the window. By noon, they had an arrangement. Gloria would work in the store, and they could stay in the smallest apartment above it. Little more than a room with a hot plate and a bathroom down the hall. The other tenants, Ms. Wilma and an older man named Ray, had watched curiously as they carried their few possessions up the narrow stairs. "Got a growing boy there," Mr. Miller had commented, noting LeBron's height. "My brother coaches basketball at the school. You should come by the court sometime." LeBron had nodded politely, though basketball seemed like the least of his concerns. He was worried about being the new kid again, about having enough to eat, about the sadness in his mother's eyes that she tried so hard to hide. The first weeks had been the hardest. Gloria worked long hours while LeBron attended the local school, where he was immediately marked as an outsider. His clothes weren't right. His accent wasn't right. Nothing about him seemed to fit in Pine Hills. "Where's your daddy at?" a boy named Travis had taunted during his first lunch period. "Don't got one," LeBron had answered honestly, his voice level despite the shame that burned in his chest. "Figured," Travis had smirked. "Nobody's got daddies in the projects." The fight that followed had earned LeBron a week of detention. Gloria had been furious, not at him but at their circumstances. "We can't afford trouble, Bron," she'd said, holding ice to his swollen cheek. "We just need to keep our heads down, save every penny. This isn't forever." He'd promised to stay out of trouble, and he had, mostly. Instead of fighting, he'd found the basketball court behind the convenience store. It wasn't much, just a cracked slab of concrete with a rusted hoop that didn't even have a net, but it was something. While his mother worked, he practiced with a ball he'd made from wadded-up newspaper wrapped in duct tape. Day after day, he shot baskets alone, the rhythmic sound of the makeshift ball hitting concrete becoming the soundtrack to his afternoons. Sometimes, other kids would watch from a distance, but none approached. He was still the outsider. Until Coach Miller showed up. Timothy Miller was nothing like his brother who owned the store. Where Mr. Miller was practical and reserved, Coach was all energy and booming voice. He'd watched LeBron practicing for several days before approaching. "You've got a natural feel for it," Coach had said, startling LeBron, who hadn't noticed him, watching. "But your elbow's drifting. Try keeping it tucked in like this." The coach had demonstrated, his form perfect despite his age. LeBron had copied him, surprised when the ball arced more cleanly toward the hoop. "Better," Coach had nodded. "You practice here every day?" "Yes, sir," LeBron had replied. "Don't got nowhere else to be." The next day, Coach Miller had returned with a real basketball and a ladder. He'd attached a net to the hoop while LeBron watched in wonder. "Every real player needs a proper net," Coach had said, the ladder creaking beneath his weight. "Gotta hear that perfect swish when you make a shot." That had been the beginning. Every afternoon, Coach Miller would appear at the court, offering tips, setting up drills, pushing LeBron to improve. Sometimes, other kids would join them, even Travis eventually, but Coach always paid special attention to LeBron. "You've got something rare," Coach had told him one evening as they sat on the curb, sharing a sports drink. "Natural talent, sure, but lots of kids have that. You've got hunger in your eyes. That's what makes champions." LeBron had looked down at his worn sneakers, embarrassed by the praise but drinking it in all the same. No adult man had ever taken such an interest in him before. The hunger Coach saw wasn't just metaphorical. There were nights when Gloria's paycheck stretched thin, when dinner was a shared pack of crackers or nothing at all. LeBron never complained, but Coach seemed to know anyway. He'd started bringing extra sandwiches to their practice sessions, claiming he accidentally packed too much lunch. One particularly cold October evening, Coach had arrived at the court with a shoebox under his arm. "My nephew outgrew these," he'd said casually, though LeBron later suspected that was a lie. "Seems a waste to let them sit in a closet." The sneakers inside had been barely worn Nikes, exactly LeBron's size. He'd tried to refuse, pride warring with need, but Coach wouldn't hear of it. "A good player needs good shoes," he'd insisted. "You can't be slipping around on that old concrete. You'll hurt yourself." LeBron had worn those sneakers every day until they fell apart, long after they'd left Pine Hills. A tap on the car window jolted LeBron back to the present. A young boy, maybe 10 years old, stared at him with wide eyes, a worn basketball tucked under his arm. "You're really him, ain't you?" the boy asked when LeBron rolled down the window. "LeBron James?" LeBron smiled. "That's what they call me. What's your name?" "Marcus," the boy replied, his gaze falling to the basketball in his hands. "I play too. Not good as you, though." "Nobody starts out good," LeBron said, thinking of his younger self and that makeshift ball. "You just gotta keep practicing," Marcus nodded solemnly. "You gonna stay here long?" "Long enough," LeBron replied, starting the car engine. "I've got some people to see." As he drove toward Maple Road, toward the man who had once given him far more than just basketball lessons, LeBron wondered if Coach Miller would remember him as clearly as Ms. Wilma had. More importantly, he wondered if Coach would understand why he'd come back after all these years, why he needed to return to this place before he could move forward with the plan that had been forming in his mind for months. Some debts couldn't be repaid, but maybe, just maybe, they could be passed forward. Before seeking out Coach Miller, LeBron decided to reacquaint himself with Pine Hills. He drove slowly down the main street, taking in the changes, and, more noticeably, what hadn't changed since he'd lived here as a child. The town looked smaller than in his memories, yet the problems seemed larger. Storefronts that had been struggling 25 years ago were now boarded up entirely. The playground equipment that had been old when he was 9 was somehow still there, just more rusted and dangerous looking. The public library, once his refuge on rainy days, had a limited hours sign posted on the door. LeBron parked near the elementary school, which was quiet on this Saturday afternoon. The building needed a fresh coat of paint, and the chain link fence surrounding the property sagged in several places. Through the fence, he could see the playground where he'd once stood alone during recess, the new kid with too short pants and no friends. Walking around to the back of the school, he found what he was looking for. The basketball court? The same court where Coach Miller had first seen him play with the school team. The asphalt was cracked worse than ever, with weeds pushing through. One hoop was missing entirely, and the other hung at an angle. The backboard cracked down the middle. Not much to look at, is it? LeBron turned to find an older man watching him, arms crossed over his chest. "You're the principal here?" LeBron guessed. 22 years now," the man confirmed, approaching with an extended hand. "Walter Green, and you're LeBron James. News travels fast in Pine Hills." They shook hands, and LeBron gestured toward the dilapidated court. "Kids still play here?" "When they can," Principal Green sighed. "We've applied for grants, tried fundraisers, never enough money. The district prioritizes keeping the lights on and teachers paid, barely. How many students do you have?" 112 this year, down from 150 a decade ago. Families keep moving away, those who can, anyway. Not much opportunity here. LeBron nodded, taking mental notes. "Mind if I look around a bit more?" "Be my guest," Green replied. "Though I should warn you, if you're thinking of doing a charity event or something, we've had celebrities make promises before. Country singer came through last year, took lots of pictures with local kids, promised a benefit concert. Never happened. I'm not making any promises today," LeBron said carefully. "Just looking." Principal Green studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. I've got paperwork waiting. School's locked up, but feel free to walk the grounds." After the principal left, LeBron continued his survey of the village, driving past the water tower, the small medical clinic that was only open 2 days a week, and the community center with its sagging roof. He noted how many houses sat empty, windows dark, some with foreclosure notices visible even from the street. Eventually, hunger led him to the only diner in town, May's Place, which looked virtually unchanged from his childhood. The bell above, the door announced his arrival, and the Saturday afternoon crowd fell silent as he entered. Every head turned, conversations pausing mid-sentence. May herself, now in her 70s but still working the counter, recovered first. "Well, look what the wind blew in. Grab any seat you like, honey." LeBron chose a booth near the back, nodding politely at the staring patrons. Gradually, conversations resumed, though in hushed tones that didn't quite mask their subject matter. "Heard he bought the old factory," one man whispered. "My cousin said he's filming a documentary," suggested another. "Probably just passing through," a woman countered skeptically. A teenage waitress approached his table, hands trembling slightly as she placed a menu before him. "Can I get you something to drink?" "Just water, thank you," LeBron replied with a warm smile. Looking at the menu, he found what he was searching for, the budget special. $2.50 for a grilled cheese sandwich and a small side of fries. The same meal he and his mother would occasionally split as a treat when things weren't quite so tight. "I'll have the budget special," he told the waitress when she returned. Her eyes widened slightly. "You sure? We've got steaks and—" "The budget special is perfect," he assured her. While waiting for his food, LeBron observed the diner patrons. Working-class folks mostly, with calloused hands and tired eyes. A young mother in the corner booth counting change before ordering. An elderly couple sharing a single slice of pie. The same pride and struggle he remembered from his time here, just with different faces. May herself brought his order, sliding into the seat across from him uninvited. "Gloria James's boy," she said. Not a question, but a statement. "I remember you two. She'd bring you in here once a month, both of you sharing that same meal you just ordered." LeBron nodded, surprised. "You remember us after all this time?" "Honey, in a town this size, everybody remembers everybody." She studied his face. "So, what brings you back to our little nowhere?" "Just reconnecting," he said. The same vague answer he'd given everyone. May snorted. "Sure. And I'm just selling coffee for my health. Man like you doesn't just reconnect with a place like this without a reason." Before LeBron could respond, the diner door opened again, and Marcus, the boy from earlier, rushed in, breathing hard. "Mr. James," he called out, drawing every eye in the place. "Coach Miller, he knows you're here. He sent me to find you. Says to tell you he's waiting." May chuckled. "Guess that answers where you're headed next." She rose from the booth. "That meal's on the house." "I can pay," LeBron protested. "I know you can," May replied with a wink. "That's not the point." As LeBron finished his meal, he felt the weight of expectations building around him. News of his presence was spreading. Questions were multiplying. Soon, he'd need to provide answers. But first, he had a long-overdue reunion with the man who had seen his potential when he was just a hungry kid, with a makeshift basketball and impossible dreams. LeBron followed Marcus's directions to a small white house at the end of Maple Road. Unlike many homes in Pine Hills, this one was well-maintained. The lawn neatly trimmed, flower beds tended, fresh paint on the shutters. A wheelchair ramp had been added to the front porch, its wood newer than the rest of the structure. "This is it," Marcus said, pointing. "Coach is waiting for you." "Thanks for showing me the way," LeBron replied, handing the boy a $20 bill. Marcus stared at the money, then pushed it back. "Don't need payment for doing what's right, sir. That's what Coach always says." LeBron smiled, recognizing Timothy Miller's philosophy in the boy's words. "He's still coaching, then?" "Not officially," Marcus explained. "School let him go 5 years back. Budget cuts. But he still helps us kids after school. Teaches us plays and stuff. Even with," LeBron gestured toward the wheelchair ramp. "Even with his legs not working right," Marcus nodded. "Says basketball is played with your head and heart more than your legs anyway." LeBron felt a tightness in his chest as he approached the house. He'd rehearsed this moment many times on the drive to Pine Hills, but now that it was here, words seemed inadequate. How do you thank someone who changed the entire trajectory of your life? Before he could knock, the door swung open. Timothy Miller sat in a wheelchair, his once powerful frame diminished by age and illness. But his eyes, those piercing blue eyes that had once seen potential in a poor kid with a homemade basketball, were unchanged. "Took you long enough," Coach Miller said, his voice raspier than LeBron remembered, but still carrying that note of authority that could make you stand straighter without thinking. "Been waiting 25 years for you to stop by." LeBron's carefully prepared speech dissolved. Instead, he dropped to one knee, bringing himself eye level with his old mentor, and embraced him. Coach Miller's arms, still strong from years of wheeling himself around, returned the hug fiercely. "There he is," Coach murmured. "There's my boy." Marcus slipped away quietly as Coach wheeled back to let LeBron enter the house. The interior was modest but comfortable. Walls covered with framed photographs, most of them basketball teams Coach had led over his 40-year career. "You want something to drink?" Coach offered. "Got water, coffee, or something stronger if you're in that kind of mood?" "Coffee's fine," LeBron replied, his eyes drawn to a specific section of wall where dozens of newspaper clippings were framed together. Moving closer, he realized they were all about him. From his high school championships, through his NBA draft, his championships, his school in Akron, every major milestone of his career preserved under glass. "You followed all of it," LeBron said softly. Coach wheeled into the kitchen to put on coffee. "Course I did. You think I'd miss watching the best player I ever coached make history?" "You only coached me for a few months," LeBron pointed out, following him. "Quality over quantity," Coach replied with a wink. "Besides, I knew what you'd become the first time I saw you shoot. Some things you can just tell." While the coffee brewed, Coach led LeBron to his small living room. Photos of Coach's late wife adorned the mantel, along with pictures of what must be his children and grandchildren. They wanted me to move in with them after the stroke, Coachy explained, noticing LeBron's gaze. My daughter in Columbus has a big house, plenty of room. But this is home. 52 years in Pine Hills. Can't leave now. LeBron nodded, understanding the attachment to place that kept people in struggling towns long after opportunity had departed. Tell me about the kids you're coaching now, LeBron prompted, accepting a mug of coffee. Marcus seems like a good kid. Coach's face lit up. Those kids keep me going. Marcus has real talent. Reminds me of you sometimes. Got that same hunger. His mama works 3 jobs, barely keeps food on the table, but that boy never complains. Just works harder. For the next hour, Coach shared stories about the local children he mentored, his voice animated and proud. He spoke of their challenges, poverty, absent parents, the lure of drugs that had infiltrated even this small community, and their triumphs, however small. Problem is, Coach said, sobering, there's nowhere for them to go from here. Even the ones with real talent. College scouts don't come to Pine Hills. Nobody comes to Pine Hills. Except me, LeBron said quietly. Coach studied him for a long moment. Yeah, except you. And I've been wondering why, exactly. Don't get me wrong, it's damn good to see you. But a man like you doesn't just happen through a place like this without a reason. LeBron set down his coffee mug and leaned forward. I've been thinking about Pine Hills for a long time. About what this place gave me. What you gave me. I didn't give you anything you didn't already have, Coach protested. You gave me belief, LeBron countered. When everyone else saw a poor kid with no father and worn-out shoes, you saw something else. Coach waved away the praise. Any fool with eyes could see what you had in you, but you were the only one who did. LeBron paused, carefully choosing his next words. I want to do something for Pine Hills, something real, something lasting, not just a donation or a one-time event. Coach's expression turned serious. What kind of something? LeBron explained the outlines of what he'd been considering. An integrated approach to revitalizing the community through education, job training, healthcare access, and infrastructure improvements. As he spoke, Coach listened intently, occasionally, nodding or asking clarifying questions. That's ambitious, Coach said when LeBron finished. You're talking about millions. I can afford it, LeBron replied simply. It's not about the money, Coach said, wheeling closer. It's about sustainability. This town's been dying for decades. One-shot charity won't change that trajectory. Believe me, we've tried everything. That's why I'm thinking longer term, LeBron explained. A foundation with permanent funding, local leadership, partnerships with businesses that can provide jobs. Coach rubbed his chin thoughtfully. You've put real thought into this. I have, LeBron confirmed. But I need your help. You know this town, its history, its people, what it truly needs. I've got resources and connections, but you've got the local knowledge. A slow smile spread across Coach's weathered face. You're still running plays the way I taught you. Set up before you. Execute! Some lessons stick, LeBron agreed, returning the smile. Coach wheeled to a nearby bookshelf and pulled out a worn leather binder. Been keeping notes for years on what this town needs, what would actually make a difference. Most folks thought, I was just a crazy old man with too much time on his hands. He handed the binder to LeBron, who opened it to find meticulously organized plans, community resource maps, demographic analyses, and proposal drafts. You've been planning this for years, LeBron realized, flipping through the pages. Planning? Yes. Had the vision but not the means, Coach admitted. Sometimes you draw up the perfect play, but you need the right player to execute it. LeBron felt a wave of emotion as he understood the synchronicity of their thinking, how they had both, separately but simultaneously, been working toward the same goal from different angles. "There's one more thing I need to ask you," LeBron said, closing the binder carefully. "Would you be willing to help lead this? Not just the planning, but the implementation? I need someone I trust, someone who loves this community, to be my eyes and ears when I can't be here." Coach's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "At my age? With these wheels?" "Age means wisdom," LeBron countered. "And those wheels haven't stopped. You from coaching kids all these years? Why should they stop you from coaching a whole community back to life?" Coach extended his hand, which LeBron clasped firmly. "Partners, then," Coach said. "Partners," LeBron agreed. As they continued talking into the evening, the sky darkened outside. Coach shared more details from his binder, and LeBron outlined the resources he could bring to bear. Both men understood they were plotting not just a charitable project, but a potential revolution in how forgotten communities might be revitalized. Before leaving, LeBron noticed a basketball whistle hanging on a hook by the door, the same whistle Coach had worn around his neck all those years ago. Coach followed his gaze. "Still got your first real basketball, too. The one I gave you, in that closet over there." "You saved it all this time?" LeBron asked, surprised. "Told you I knew what you'd become," Coach replied with a knowing smile. "Some things you just feel in your bones." As LeBron prepared to leave, promising to return the next day to continue their planning, Coach called him back. "LeBron," he said, his voice suddenly serious, "whatever you're planning, this town's been disappointed before. Folks here have had their hopes raised and dashed too many times. If you're going to do this, be certain you can follow through." LeBron nodded solemnly. "I give you my word." "Then that's good enough for me," Coach replied. It always was. Word of LeBron's presence in Pine Hills spread like wildfire. By the following morning, local news vans had appeared at the town limits, reporters eager for a glimpse of the basketball superstar and a quote about why he had returned to this forgotten corner of the country. LeBron avoided them all, instructing the small bed and breakfast where he'd taken a room to deflect inquiries. Instead, he spent the morning with Coach Miller, going over the contents of the leather binder in detail and making calls to his financial team and foundation directors. By noon, they had agreed on the next step, a town meeting to gather community input. "People need to be heard," Coach insisted. "Whatever we do has to come from their needs, not just what we think they need." LeBron agreed, and by mid-afternoon, flyers had appeared around town announcing a community meeting at the Pine Hills Community Center at 7 that evening. The simple message, "LeBron James invites all Pine Hills residents to discuss the future of our community," was enough to ensure attendance. At 6:30, people began arriving. By 6:45, the community center was filled beyond capacity, with residents standing along the walls and spilling out onto the sidewalk. The air conditioning struggled against the combined body heat, and handheld paper fans fluttered throughout the crowd. In a small room off the main hall, LeBron paced nervously while Coach watched him with amusement. "Never seen you nervous before. A crowd," Coach observed. "Not even during the NBA Finals." "This is different," LeBron replied. "These people—" He trailed off, searching for words. "They're your people," Coach finished for him. "In a way, the fans in those arenas never were." LeBron nodded. recognizing the truth in those words. "I don't want to let them down." "So don't," Coach said simply. "Listen more than you talk. Promise less than you plan to deliver. They'll respect that." At 7 sharp, Mayor Reynolds, a harried-looking woman in her 50s, called the meeting to order. The crowd fell silent as she introduced LeBron, who wheeled Coach Miller onto the small stage beside him. "Thank you all for coming," LeBron began, his deep voice carrying easily through the room without need of the crackling microphone. "I know you're wondering why I'm here." "You buying the town?" someone called out, generating nervous laughter. LeBron smiled. "No, I'm not buying Pine Hills, but I am interested in its future." He spoke briefly about his connection to the village, the 8 months he had lived there with his mother, the hardships they had faced, and the kindness they had received from certain community members. He mentioned Coach Miller specifically, placing a hand on the older man's shoulder. "This place shaped me," LeBron continued. "The struggles here taught me resilience. The kindness I found here taught me the importance of community." The crowd listened intently, many nodding in recognition of their own experiences. "I've been fortunate in my life and career," LeBron said, deliberately understating his success. "And I've reached a point where I want to give back in a meaningful way. Not just with money, but with sustained commitment." A ripple of excitement moved through the room. Principal Green, sitting in the front row, leaned forward, his skepticism from the previous day giving way to cautious hope. "I could stand here and tell you what I think Pine Hills needs," LeBron continued, "but that would be presumptuous. I haven't lived here in 25 years. You have. You know this community's strengths, its challenges, its dreams better than I ever could." He paused, scanning the faces before him, young and old, hopeful and cynical, all waiting for his next words. "So I'm here to listen, to learn from you what Pine Hills truly needs, not for a quick fix, but for sustainable change." A stunned silence fell over the room. People exchanged glances, seemingly unsure if they had heard correctly. They had expected an announcement, perhaps a donation or the unveiling of a basketball court. Instead, LeBron James, global icon, multimillionaire, one of the most powerful voices in sports, was asking them to tell him what to do. After a moment, hands began to rise. LeBron pointed to an elderly man near the back. Name's Harold Jenkins. "Been here 63 years, the man said, standing shakily. "What we need most is jobs. Factory closed 10 years back, took 300 positions with it. Young folks leave as soon as they graduate. Those who graduate, can't blame them. Nothing here for them." LeBron nodded, gesturing to Coach Miller, who jotted notes in a small pad. A middle-aged woman stood next. "Diane Mercer. I teach 2nd grade. Our school building is falling apart. Textbooks are outdated. No computers for the kids to learn technology. How can they compete in today's world?" One by one, residents spoke up about the lack of healthcare access, the deteriorating infrastructure, the absence of after-school programs, the drug problem that had crept in as hope had crept out. LeBron listened attentively to each speaker, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly absorbing their concerns. The meeting, scheduled for 1 hour, stretched to 2, then 3. No one left. Finally, a young woman holding a baby stood up. "I'm Ashley Williams. I was born here, and I want to raise my daughter here. But sometimes I wonder if that's selfish of me. Am I limiting her future by staying?" Her question hung in the air, embodying the central dilemma of Pine Hills and countless communities like it. LeBron stepped forward. "That's exactly the question we need to answer together. How do we make Pine Hills a place where staying isn't a sacrifice? Where your daughter can grow up with both roots and wings?" He surveyed the room again, noting the mixture of hope and skepticism on the faces before him. "I'm not making any specific announcements tonight," he said, and saw some of the hope dim. "Because I want to do this right. I'm committing to Pine Hills for the long haul. Not a one-time donation, not a quick publicity stunt." Coach Miller wheeled forward slightly. "LeBron and I will be forming a working group to develop a comprehensive plan based on what we've heard tonight. We'll need representatives from education, healthcare, business, and community leadership. Volunteers can sign up at the back table." By the time the meeting concluded, the sign-up sheet overflowed with names. As people filed out, many approached LeBron personally, some to share additional thoughts, others simply to thank him for returning. Ms. Wilma, who had sat quietly throughout the meeting, was the last to leave. "You surprised them," she said, her eyes twinkling. "They expected a check and a photo op. You gave them something more valuable." "What's that?" LeBron asked. "A voice," she replied, simply. "And maybe something they'd almost given up on." "What's that?" he asked again. Ms. Wilma patted his arm. "Hope, child. You gave them hope." As they locked up the community center, Coach Miller looked thoughtful. "What's on your mind, Coach?" LeBron asked. "Just wondering if you realize what you've started." "Here," Coach replied. "These folks are going to have different ideas about what's needed. Some will conflict. Some might be impractical. The corporate types will want economic development. The teachers will want education resources. The parents will want safe spaces for kids. Navigating all that won't be easy." LeBron nodded, understanding the challenge ahead. "That's why I need your help. We're going to make this work, Coach. Pine Hills deserves it." As they left the community center, neither man noticed the small drone hovering overhead, its camera recording their exit for the morning news, nor the social media posts already spreading across the internet, speculating about the basketball star's mysterious project in this tiny, struggling village. The first real test of LeBron's commitment was about to begin. The morning after the town meeting, LeBron woke to his phone buzzing incessantly. Overnight, the story had exploded. LeBron James's secret project in Forgotten Hometown read one headline. "Basketball star's mysterious return to poverty-stricken village," proclaimed another. His publicist had left 6 messages, all increasingly urgent. LeBron silenced the phone. The media attention was inevitable, but he wasn't ready to make any public statements yet. First, he needed to immerse himself in Pine Hills, to truly understand its challenges and strengths from the inside out. Over the next several days, LeBron established a routine. Mornings were spent with Coach Miller and a small committee of local leaders reviewing the community's needs and drafting preliminary plans. Afternoons were dedicated to visiting different parts of the village, talking with residents, and seeing firsthand what newspaper statistics and meeting testimonials couldn't fully convey. On Wednesday, he visited the elementary school. Principal Green led him through hallways where ceiling tiles showed water damage and classroom walls needed paint. In one 4th-grade class, children sat at desks that wobbled on uneven legs, while their teacher wrote on a chalkboard because the whiteboard was too stained to use. "We make do," the teacher, Mrs. Henderson, explained with forced cheerfulness. "The kids are resilient." LeBron watched as the students worked on math problems using outdated textbooks. One girl carefully erased her work multiple times, trying to preserve her near-empty notebook. "How often do you get new supplies?" LeBron asked quietly. "The district provides the basics in August," Mrs. Henderson replied. "After that, I buy what I can. Most teachers here spend at least $1,000 of their own money each year on classroom essentials." Principal Green nodded grimly. "And Our teachers earn about 30% less than the state average. Many work second jobs. In the cafeteria, LeBron noticed children tucking food into their pockets. The cafeteria worker caught his questioning glance. For later, she explained softly. Or for siblings at home. For some, it's the only reliable meal they get. Later that day, LeBron visited the park where he'd once played. Marcus and several other children were shooting baskets at the rusted hoop, using a ball that had seen better days. When they spotted LeBron, they froze momentarily before Marcus waved him over. "Want to play, Mr. James?" the boy called out. For the next hour, LeBron played basketball with the children, teaching them moves, correcting their form, encouraging their efforts, just as Coach Miller had once done for him. "Where do you guys go after school usually?" LeBron asked during a water break. The children exchanged glances. "Nowhere special," Marcus answered. "The library's only open till 4. Community centers mostly for meetings. Mostly we just hang out here or go home." "What about clubs or sports teams?" A girl named Zoe shook her head. "School cut most programs. They kept varsity basketball, but not much else." "So what do older kids do?" LeBron pressed. "Nothing good," Marcus replied, his voice suddenly serious. "My brother's 18. He just hangs with friends, sometimes gets in trouble. Says there's no point trying when there's nowhere to go from here." On Thursday, LeBron toured the eastern side of town, where abandoned storefronts lined what had once been a busy commercial street. The former factory, Pine Hills Manufacturing, stood like a rusted monument to better days, its windows broken, its vast parking lot cracked and overgrown. Mayor Reynolds walked alongside him. 300 jobs lost when it closed. Some folks found work in the next county over, but that's a 40-minute drive each way. Many couldn't manage it without reliable transportation. "What's been attempted to bring in new businesses?" LeBron asked. "Everything we could think of," the mayor sighed. "Tax incentives, workforce training programs, infrastructure improvements to the extent our budget allowed. But companies look at our location, the skill level of our workforce, the condition of our buildings, and choose to go elsewhere." Cementu ansesensinfiu. That evening, LeBron joined a group of teenagers at the small library. Initially awkward around him, they gradually opened up when he asked about their dreams. "I want to be a nurse," said a girl named Tasha. "But the nearest nursing program is 60 miles away. No public transportation, and my mom needs our only car for work." "Computer programming," added a boy named Darnell. "But we have like 3 working computers in the whole school, and our internet cuts out all the time." One by one, the teens shared aspirations that seemed just out of reach, not for lack of talent or motivation, but for lack of access and opportunity. On Friday, LeBron visited the small medical clinic where a tired-looking doctor and 2 nurses served the entire community. "We're open Tuesdays and Thursdays," Dr. Garcia explained. "For emergencies or specialized care, people have to go to County General, 30 miles away. Many don't have transportation or can't afford to miss work, so they simply don't get care. Until it's critical." Throughout these visits, LeBron took notes, asked questions, and listened more than he spoke. He observed how people lived, what they needed, and, most importantly, what assets the community already possessed that could be built upon. By Saturday, when he met with Coach Miller and the committee to consolidate their findings, LeBron had filled 3 notebooks. "It's worse than I remembered in some ways," LeBron admitted as they gathered around Coach's dining table. "But there's so much potential here, too." Ms. Wilma, who had joined the committee, nodded. "Always has been. Just needed the right spark." The committee had grown to include Principal Green, Mayor Reynolds, Dr. Garcia, 2 local business owners, and several longtime residents. They spent hours discussing priorities, debating approaches, and sometimes disagreeing passionately about what Pine Hills needed most. Education has to be the foundation, Principal Green insisted. Without that, nothing else matters long-term. People need jobs first, countered Frank Delgado, owner of the local hardware store. Can't focus on education when you're worried about putting food on the table. Healthcare access underlies everything, Dr. Garcia argued. A community can't thrive when its people are sick or injured without resources. LeBron let them debate, understanding that each perspective had validity. The challenge would be creating an integrated approach that addressed multiple needs simultaneously. As the discussion continued, LeBron noticed a newspaper someone had left on the counter. The headline read, "LeBron's Pine Hills Promise. Publicity stunt or real commitment?" Coach Miller followed his gaze and snorted. "Pay it no mind. People always doubt until they see results." "It's a fair question," LeBron acknowledged. "I've been asking a lot of questions, but haven't shared many specific plans yet." "Because you're doing it right," Coach replied firmly. "Remember what I told you about promising less than you deliver?" Most folks would have rolled in here with camera crews, handed over a big check, cut a ribbon, and been gone before the ink dried. Ms. Wilma nodded. "We've seen that type before. They get their name on a building and their face on the news, but nothing really changes." Mayor Reynolds, who had been quiet for much of the debate, finally spoke up. "The question isn't whether LeBron is committed. I think we all see that he is. The question is whether we can agree on a path forward that truly serves the whole community." A tense silence fell over the room. After a moment, LeBron stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the town he'd once called home briefly, the place that had shaped him during one of his most vulnerable periods. These people had welcomed him back, shared their struggles, their dreams, their disagreements. They deserved more than vague assurances. "I need to show them something concrete," LeBron said finally, turning back to the group. "Not everything. We're still developing the full vision. But enough to know this isn't just talk." Coach Miller studied him. "You have something specific in mind." It wasn't a question, but LeBron nodded anyway. "I do, and I think it's time to share it with everyone." Little did the committee know that LeBron's plan was far more ambitious and would require far more personal commitment than any of them imagined. The true test of his dedication to Pine Hills was about to become public. LeBron called for a second town meeting, scheduled for Monday evening. This time, the community center couldn't accommodate the crowd. The local news had picked up the story, and residents from neighboring towns were curious about what the basketball star was planning. The gathering was moved to the high school gymnasium, the only space in Pine Hills large enough to hold everyone interested. By 6 o'clock, the gym was filled beyond capacity. Folding chairs covered the basketball court, with standing room only along the walls. Local reporters positioned themselves near the front, cameras ready. Even a few national media outlets had sent representatives, intrigued by the mysterious project that had brought LeBron James to this forgotten corner of the country. At precisely 6:30, LeBron entered through the side door, accompanied by Coach Miller and the committee members. The crowd rose to their feet, applauding spontaneously. LeBron raised a hand in acknowledgement, but looked uncomfortable with the attention. Once everyone was seated, LeBron approached the microphone set up at center court. Ironically, the same spot where he had once played as a child when Coach Miller brought him to weekend practice sessions at the high school. "Thank you all for coming," LeBron began. "Over the past week, I've had the privilege of reconnecting with Pine Hills, visiting your schools, businesses, neighborhoods, and speaking with many of you personally." He paused, surveying the crowd. "I've seen both challenges and opportunities. I've heard your concerns and your hopes, and I promised to share more concrete plans about how I hope to help." The room fell silent, anticipation thick in the air. "First, I want to make something clear," LeBron continued. "I'm not here to be a savior. No single person, no matter how many resources they have, can transform a community alone. Real, lasting change requires local leadership, community involvement, and long-term commitment from everyone." Several committee members nodded in agreement. Principal Green leaned forward in his seat, hands clasped tightly together. "That said, I am in a position to help Catapsy change," LeBron acknowledged, "and I'm prepared to make a significant, long-term commitment to Pine Hills." He motioned to Mayor Reynolds, who stood and joined him at the microphone. "LeBron has presented us with a preliminary proposal," the mayor announced. "Our committee has reviewed it, debated it, and ultimately agreed that it represents a thoughtful approach to addressing multiple community needs simultaneously." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Mayor Reynolds continued, "To be clear, this is not a final plan. We're sharing it to gather your feedback. Every resident of Pine Hills should have a voice in shaping our community's future." LeBron reclaimed the microphone. "Here's what I'm proposing: the creation of the Pine Hills Revival Initiative, a comprehensive program with 5 key components." He held up one finger. "First, education. Completely renovating the elementary and high schools with modern facilities, technology, updated materials, and expanded programs. A second finger. Second, healthcare. Converting the part-time clinic into a full-time community health center with expanded services, telehealth capabilities for specialist consultations, and transportation assistance for those who need care, beyond what we can provide locally. A third finger. Third, job creation and economic development. Establishing a business incubator to support local entrepreneurs, job training programs aligned with regional employment opportunities, and incentives to attract new businesses to the area. A fourth finger. Fourth, community spaces. Renovating the community center, creating safe places for youth activities, and developing public spaces that foster connection and pride of place. His final finger joined the others. Fifth, housing. A program to help current residents repair and upgrade their homes, along with targeted development of new, affordable housing options to stabilize the population and attract new families. The gymnasium erupted in excited chatter. LeBron raised his hands, waiting for quiet to return. This initiative would be funded initially through a substantial investment from my foundation, but with the goal of becoming self-sustaining over time through partnerships, grants, and eventually economic growth within Pine Hills itself. Principal Green stood up. "What kind of timeline are we talking about here?" Phase 1, school renovations and the health center expansion, would begin immediately, with completion targeted within 1 year, LeBron replied. The remaining components would be implemented over a 3 to 5 year period, with ongoing evaluation and adjustment based on results and community feedback. Frank Delgado, the hardware store owner, raised his hand next. "Who's going to run this? You can't be here all the time with your career." It was the question many had been wondering. How involved would LeBron truly be once the initial excitement faded? "Good question," LeBron acknowledged. The initiative would be managed by a local board, primarily composed of Pine Hills residents, with support from professional staff experienced in community development. My foundation would provide oversight and resources, but decisions would be made here by people who understand this community best. He looked toward Coach Miller. "I've asked Coach Miller to serve as the initial board chairman. if he's willing. Later, eyes turned to Coach, who appeared surprised by the public request. After a moment, he nodded firmly. I'd be honored. Dr. Garcia stood next. What about sustainability? We've seen projects fail when initial funding runs out. Another excellent question, LeBron replied. Unlike a one-time donation, this initiative includes an endowment component, money permanently set aside, with the investment returns providing ongoing funding. Additionally, we'll be working to develop revenue-generating aspects of the program and to secure matching funds from other foundations and government sources. He paused, sensing the mixture of excitement and skepticism in the room. I understand your concerns. Pine Hills has heard promises before. That's why I'm not just committing funds, but also my personal involvement. I'll be establishing a part-time residence here, spending at least 1 week each month in Pine Hills to work directly with the initiative. This announcement sent another wave of whispers through the crowd. LeBron James, moving to Pine Hills, even part-time? My role in the NBA gives me a platform and connections that can benefit this community, LeBron continued. But more importantly, this place helped shape me during a crucial time in my life. This isn't charity. It's an investment in a community that invested in me when I had nothing. For the next hour, residents asked questions, offered suggestions, and occasionally voiced skepticism. Some worried about increased traffic or outsiders moving in. Others questioned whether the initiative would truly benefit everyone, or just certain neighborhoods. A few expressed concern that the changes might alter Pine Hills' character or raise property taxes beyond what current residents could afford. LeBron and the committee addressed each concern honestly, sometimes acknowledging that they didn't yet have all the answers but were committed to finding them together with the community. As the meeting concluded, Mayor Reynolds made a final announcement. We'll be setting up an information center at the community center where you can learn more, ask questions, and provide input. Nothing is finalized yet. This is your community, and your voice matters in shaping its future. The crowd dispersed, slowly, buzzing with conversations about what they'd heard. Some were openly enthusiastic, others cautiously optimistic, and a few remained skeptical, but no one was indifferent. As LeBron prepared to leave with Coach Miller, Ashley Williams, the young mother who had spoken at the previous meeting, approached, with her baby in her arms. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said softly. "Not just for what you're planning to do, but for how you're doing it, asking us what we think, involving us in the decisions. It makes me feel like maybe Pine Hills has a future after all. Like maybe my daughter could grow up here and still have opportunities." LeBron smiled, gently touching the sleeping baby's hand. "That's the goal. A place with both roots and wings, remember?" As they walked to the parking lot, Coach Miller looked thoughtful. "What's on your mind, Coach?" LeBron asked. "Just thinking about that meeting," Coach replied. "You notice how it shifted? Started with everyone looking to you for answers, ended with them seeing themselves as part of the solution." LeBron nodded. "That's exactly what we need. I can provide resources, but they have to own the process." "Smart play," Coach acknowledged. "But you surprised even me with that part about living here part-time. You serious about that?" "Completely," LeBron confirmed. "This won't work if I'm just a name on the letterhead. I need to be present, visible, consistent." Coach Miller smiled slowly. "Well then, sounds like Pine Hills is about to get a new part-time resident. Hope you're ready for what comes next." What came next would test not only LeBron's financial commitment, but his personal resolve as well. The morning after the town meeting, LeBron sat with Coach Miller on the older man's front porch, both men watching the sunrise paint Pine Hills in soft, golden light. 3 weeks, LeBron said, checking his calendar. I'll have everything in place with my foundation and be back to break ground on the first projects. Coach nodded, though his eyes held a hint of reservation. People here have heard promises before. This isn't just a promise, LeBron replied, resting his hand on Coach's shoulder. It's a commitment. Before departing, LeBron made a series of meaningful stops throughout the village. He visited Ms. Wilma, who pressed a small hand-knitted keychain into his palm. "So you remember your way back," she said with a wink. He met with Principal Green to discuss immediate school improvements that could begin while larger renovations were being planned. He spent an hour at the old basketball court with Marcus and his friends, running drills and sharing techniques. His final visit was to the abandoned factory building, where he stood alone in the cavernous space, envisioning what it could become. "Saying your goodbyes?" Mayor Reynolds asked, appearing in the doorway. "No," LeBron replied, "just imagining hellos. This place could be something special again." The mayor stepped closer, dust motes dancing in the sunlight between them. "The question everyone's asking, not to your face, of course, is whether you'll still care about Pine Hills when you're back in your world of championships and celebrity." "I understand their skepticism," LeBron acknowledged, "but I'm asking them to judge me by what happens next, not by what they've experienced before." As he drove away that afternoon, his rearview mirror showed a small impromptu gathering. Coach Miller in his wheelchair, Ms. Wilma waving a handkerchief, Marcus bouncing a basketball, and several committee members standing with expressions ranging from hope to doubt. 3 weeks became 4, then 6. Basketball playoffs, sponsor commitments, and family obligations created unavoidable delays. LeBron maintained daily contact with Coach and weekly video conferences with the committee. Architects were hired, legal frameworks established, and initial funds transferred. The work was proceeding, just without his physical presence. In his absence, the village divided into 3 camps: the believers, the skeptics, and the wait-and-see majority caught somewhere in between. "Man's not coming back," declared Travis, LeBron's childhood bully, now managing the local gas station. "Big stars make big promises they don't keep. Tale as old as time." May from the diner disagreed. "You don't spend this kind of money on architects and lawyers for a publicity stunt. Give the man time." At the barbershop, Mr. Wilson held court with his own perspective. "I don't care if he comes back or not, long as the money does. My roof's been leaking for 3 years." Coach Miller became LeBron's staunchest defender, pointing to tangible progress happening behind the scenes. The assessment teams at the school, the medical equipment, deliveries, the business consultants conducting interviews throughout town. "Actions speak louder than words," became his mantra whenever doubts were voiced. But as 1 month became 2, then 3, even Coach's confidence began to waver. Attendance at committee meetings dwindled. The information center at the community center sat empty most days. Media interest faded without LeBron's star power to sustain it. On a chilly autumn evening, Coach sat alone reviewing project timelines when his phone rang. "How are things there?" LeBron asked after discussing foundation updates. Coach hesitated, then chose honesty. "Losing momentum. People notice you're not here." The playoffs went longer than expected. "Then I had commitments to—" "I know," Coach interrupted gently, "but folks here just see your absence, not your reasons." Silence filled the line for several seconds. "Remember what I taught you about consistency versus intensity?" Coach continued. "That's showing up regularly, matters more than occasional brilliance? I remember, LeBron replied quietly. Pine Hills needs you to show up, son. Not just your name on documents. You. After hanging up, Coach wheeled to his window, gazing out at the darkened street. He hadn't mentioned that morning's discovery. Someone had spray-painted empty promises across the sign, announcing the future Pine Hills Community Health Center. Coach remembered LeBron as a child, practicing alone on a crumbling court, long after other kids had gone home. The determination in those young eyes had been real. But would the man remember what the boy had learned in this small village? That keeping your word matters most when it's hardest to keep? As wind scattered autumn leaves across his front yard, Coach Miller wondered if the project that had sparked so much hope would become just another disappointment for a town that had seen too many. The true test of LeBron's commitment had begun, and Pine Hills was watching. 2 days after Coach Miller's phone call, Pine Hills awakened to an unusual sight. A convoy of trucks rolled down Main Street before most residents had their morning coffee. Large vehicles bearing construction company logos, followed by smaller vans filled with equipment and supplies. The procession moved purposefully through town, headed for the elementary school. Mr. Delgado, opening his hardware store, stepped onto the sidewalk to watch. What in the world? Across the street, May emerged from her diner, wiping her hands on her apron. Somebody knows something I don't? By 8 o'clock, a small crowd had gathered at the school, where workers were already unloading equipment. Principal Green stood watching, his expression a mixture of surprise and cautious hope. What's happening? Ms. Wilma asked, having made her way there with the help of a neighbor. Renovation crew, Principal Green replied. Got a call last night saying they'd be here this morning. Didn't quite believe it until now. The foreman, a burly man with a clipboard, approached the gathering crowd. Folks, we're going to need some space to work. First phase is setting up temporary classrooms in those trailers we're bringing in. Once those are ready, we'll start gutting the main building. Full renovation, new wiring, plumbing, HVAC, the works. Who authorized this? Mayor Reynolds demanded, having arrived slightly breathless. The town council hasn't finalized any contracts. Ma'am, all I know is we got paid in advance and have signed permits. The foreman handed her a folder. Everything should be in order. As the mayor reviewed the documents, more trucks arrived. These headed for the medical clinic. By noon, similar activity had begun at the community center. Teams of workers moved with coordinated efficiency, as if following a carefully orchestrated plan. News spread quickly through Pine Hills. Residents drove or walked by the various sites, watching in amazement as temporary fences went up and construction equipment was positioned. Some remained skeptical, others increasingly hopeful. It's really happening, Marcus said, watching from his bicycle as workers began removing the outdated playground equipment at the elementary school. Travis, passing by in his pickup truck, remained unconvinced. Let's see if they're still here next week. The next morning brought even more activity. Internet technicians arrived to begin installing fiber optic lines throughout the village. A team of landscapers started work on the town square. Architects conducted detailed assessments of the abandoned factory building, and at the site where empty promises had been spray-painted across the health center sign, a crew was carefully removing the graffiti, while another installed security cameras. By the third day, the initial shock had given way to buzzing excitement. The school board held an emergency meeting to coordinate with the construction teams. Dr. Garcia was seen walking through the clinic with medical equipment suppliers. Local. Residents were being interviewed for construction jobs and support positions. Yet, through it all, one question persisted. Where was LeBron? The answer came on the fourth day, when a modest SUV pulled up to Coach Miller's house early in the morning. LeBron stepped out, looking tired from travel, but determined. He carried a small duffel bag and what appeared to be building plans under his arm. Coach was waiting on his porch, having heard the vehicle approach. "You came back." "I told you I would," LeBron replied, climbing the steps to embrace his mentor. "Without cameras," Coach observed. "No entourage." "This isn't about publicity," LeBron said, taking a seat beside Coach. "It's about keeping my word." Later that morning, LeBron visited each construction site, introducing himself to the workers not as a celebrity, but as part of the project team. He reviewed progress, asked detailed questions, and thanked people for their efforts. At the school, he helped carry materials alongside the construction crew. His designer shoes quickly covered in dust. Word of his return spread throughout Pine Hills, but without the fanfare of his first arrival. This time, he wasn't making announcements or holding meetings. He was working. By evening, he had established himself in a small apartment above the hardware store, the same building where he and his mother had once lived, though a different unit. Mr. Delgado, the building's current owner, had renovated it specifically for LeBron's use during his stays in Pine Hills. "Not exactly what you're used to," Mr. Delgado commented as he handed over the keys. "It's perfect," LeBron replied, looking around at the simple, clean space. "Reminds me where I came from." That night, LeBron joined Coach Miller, Ms. Wilma, and the core committee members for dinner at May's Diner. The mood was lighter than it had been in months, with conversation focused on specific next steps rather than vague promises. "The first phase projects are fully funded and contracted," LeBron explained. "School renovation, health center expansion, community center upgrades, and fiber internet installation for the entire town, all scheduled for completion within 6 months." "And after that?" Principal Green asked. "Phase 2 depends partly on what we learn from Phase 1, LeBron replied honestly. "But the factory redevelopment plans are being finalized, and we've secured 3 business partners interested in establishing operations there, with a commitment to local hiring." As the town slept that night, the lights in LeBron's apartment remained on late into the evening. Through the window, he could be seen at a table covered with blueprints and project timelines, preparing for the days ahead. The transformation of Pine Hills had truly begun, not with grand ceremonies or symbolic gestures, but with concrete action and the quiet return of a man determined to keep his promise. What no one yet realized was that Pine Hills represented just the beginning of LeBron's vision, a pilot for something far more ambitious than anyone had imagined. 6 months passed in a whirlwind of activity. LeBron divided his time between his professional obligations and Pine Hills, spending at least 1 week each month in the village as promised. When he couldn't be physically present, he participated in daily video calls with the project teams and committee members. Progress was visible everywhere. The elementary school renovation had been completed ahead of schedule, revealing a modern facility with bright classrooms, new technology, and a proper gymnasium. The medical clinic had been expanded into a full community health center with telehealth capabilities, connecting patients to specialists at major hospitals. The community center boasted a computer lab, meeting spaces, and after-school programs that quickly reached capacity. Most significantly, the first phase of the factory redevelopment had begun. The massive building had been divided into sections, one for a technical training center, another for small business incubator spaces, and a third for a distribution center that had already hired 20 local residents. On a crisp spring morning, exactly 1 year after LeBron's initial return to Pine Hills, the town gathered for what had been billed as a progress celebration. The event was held at the newly renovated school gymnasium, which was filled to capacity. Unlike previous community meetings, this one had a festive atmosphere. A student jazz band performed as people entered, Tables displayed before and after photos of the various projects. Children ran about wearing T-shirts with the Pine Hills Revival Initiative logo, a rising phoenix designed by a local high school. Student LeBron arrived with Coach Miller, both men smiling as they made their way through the crowd, stopping frequently to chat with residents. Gone was the skepticism that had once greeted LeBron. In its place was genuine appreciation and, more importantly, renewed community pride. Mayor Reynolds called the gathering to order, welcoming everyone before introducing LeBron. As he approached the podium, the applause was thunderous. 1 year ago, LeBron began, I stood in this same building, which looked very different then, and asked for your trust. Today, I want to thank you for giving it to me. He gestured to the transformation photos displayed around the room. What you see here isn't my achievement. It's ours, collectively. Every committee member, every worker, every resident who offered input or simply believed. You all made this happen. For the next 20 minutes, LeBron highlighted the tangible changes in Pine Hills, the 42 new jobs created, the improved test scores already being reported from the school, the 300 telehealth consultations conducted at the new health center, the 5 local businesses launched through the incubator program. But our work is far from complete, he continued, his expression turning serious. The challenges facing communities like Pine Hills didn't develop overnight, and they won't be solved that quickly either. This is a long-term commitment. Mine to you, and hopefully yours to each other, and to this place you call home. Principal Green, seated in the front row, nodded firmly. Beside him, Ms. Wilma dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Today, though, I want to share something we haven't discussed publicly before, LeBron said, his voice taking on a new intensity. Pine Hills was always meant to be more than just one community revitalization project. It was designed from the beginning as a pilot program, a test case for an approach that could be replicated in forgotten communities across the country. A murmur rippled through the crowd as people processed this information. Today, I'm officially announcing the launch of the Forgotten Communities Initiative, a national program that will identify and support rural and urban communities facing challenges similar to what Pine Hills has experienced. Using the model we've developed together, this initiative will bring resources, expertise, and sustained commitment to places that have been overlooked for too long. The screen behind him displayed a map of the United States with dozens of small points illuminated across it. Each of these points represents a community that our research team has identified as a potential participant in the next phase of the initiative. Over the next 5 years, we'll be expanding to 10 additional communities. Within a decade, we aim to reach 50. The room had fallen completely silent, the scale of LeBron's vision beginning to sink in. But here's what makes this different. From other large-scale philanthropic efforts, LeBron continued, Pine Hills won't just be the first beneficiary. It will be the headquarters for the entire initiative. He gestured toward the factory building visible through the gymnasium windows. The east wing of the redeveloped factory will house the Forgotten Communities Initiative national offices. We'll be hiring a staff of 30, primarily from Pine Hills, to coordinate the national effort. This town won't just be rebuilt. It will become the center of a movement to revitalize struggling communities across America. The announcement was met with gasps, then applause that built into a standing ovation. LeBron raised his hands, waiting for quiet to return. There's one more announcement, he said when the room had settled. The initiative needs leadership, someone who understands both the challenges these communities face and the approach we've developed here. Someone with vision, integrity, and deep commitment to this work. He turned toward Coach Miller, whose eyes widened with realization. Coach Timothy Miller has agreed to serve as the founding executive director of the Forgotten Communities Initiative. The man who once saw potential in a poor kid with a makeshift basketball will now help us see and nurture the potential in overlooked communities nationwide. Coach Miller, overcome with emotion, nodded his acceptance as the room erupted in cheers. Ms. Wilma reached over to squeeze his hand, tears streaming down her face. As the celebration continued, LeBron made his way through the crowd to where Marcus stood with his family. "Remember when I first came back? You asked me if I was going to stay long?" LeBron said to the boy. Marcus nodded. "You said, 'long enough.' Turns out, long enough is going to be a very long time," LeBron replied with a smile. "This is just the beginning." Later, as the event wound down, LeBron and Coach Miller found a quiet moment alone near the old basketball court behind the school, now beautifully renovated with proper equipment. "When I gave you that basketball all those years ago," Coach said quietly, "I hoped it might help one boy find his way. Never imagined it would lead to all this." LeBron picked up a basketball from the rack, feeling its weight in his hands. "That's the thing about a gift freely given," he replied. "You never know how far it might travel or how many lives it might touch along the way." He passed the ball to Coach, who caught it deftly despite his wheelchair. The older man smiled, recognizing the full circle moment for what it was. Not an ending, but a continuation of something that had begun decades earlier on a dusty court with a hungry child and a worn basketball. The true gift, they both understood now, wasn't the money or the buildings or even the opportunities being created. It was the belief in possibility, in potential, in the idea that forgotten places and overlooked people deserved a second chance. And that gift would continue to transform lives for generations to come. If this story of LeBron James returning to his roots and transforming not just one village, but starting a movement touched your heart, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your location in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to support more inspiring content like this. For another heartwarming story that will move you just as much, click the video appearing on your screen right now. I'll see you in the next one.